Coming off of my last video where I talked about how I believe a remake or a reboot should be used, I started thinking about my issues with a few of the films that have been remade already that could have been great but wasted their opportunity, and some of which left their respected franchises in limbo. Friday the 13th being the first film I would have loved to have the opportunity to fix. While the production looked great, the film to me lacked the charm, character, and overall feel of the series it was trying to emulate. It instead focused more on nudity and sex and majorly unlikable characters to give in to the stereotypical aspects that the series often gets blamed for creating. While some of those certainly were staples of Friday the 13th, it wasn't really shoved in your face so aggressively in films past. So how would I remake a movie like Friday the 13th? Well, first, going back to my last video, as I said, a remake should be something that takes the concept and some of the key moments of what the original series or story was and make its own standalone story based off of that. So it's not exactly designed to bounce a franchise off of. It's cool as far as fan service, but not something that you want to make 10 sequels of, unless it's something that really interests the general public. So the way I would come at it is very similar to an Elseworlds type of story, mixing elements from all of the films, but also trying to keep a little bit of mystery and suspense within the story itself. So how would I do it? This is my story. Beginning at Camp Crystal Lake, the year is shown to be 1984. We follow a POV shot of someone watching a group of counselors surrounding a campfire. Here, we get a story similar to Paul's from part 2, recounting Jason drowning in the lake 10 years ago, and how the locals believe the land is cursed, and how the legend itself is responsible for Jason's death. While no body was ever found to confirm that the boy had died, his mother would soon after disappear. She worked at the camp as a cook and would often bring Jason along with her since she couldn't afford a babysitter. Now, 10 years later, it's said on a dark night on Friday the 13th, you can still hear Jason's muffled screams coming from the lake. Screams for his mother to save him. After the group is startled by a branch breaking in the woods, they shrug it off, and Barry and Claudette excuse themselves from the group. Claudette, rattled by the story, is paranoid that the camp may be haunted, and Barry tries to calm her down, assuring her that it's just a story. Suddenly, we hear a voice from the shadows. It's not just a story. Jason Voorhees was real. He died alone and screaming. It's why this place hasn't been open until now. The figure steps out of the shadows, revealing herself to be Pamela Voorhees. She continues to talk to the two counselors, slowly stepping toward them, getting more and more unhinged in her speaking. As Claudette visually becomes unnerved, Barry steps face to face with Pamela, demanding she stop talking. Pamela, enraged, stabs Barry in the stomach, causing him to collapse. Claudette sees this and tries to scream, but Pamela quickly grabs her, holding her mouth and slashing her throat. Pamela then says to herself, "Don't worry, Jason. They didn't get away." Here, we see a girl named Alice Hardy driving on a highway to Camp Crystal Lake. But before she arrives, she stops in a diner to grab some food and striking up a conversation with a truck driver. He notices that she's not from the area and asks, "What brings you to Wessex County?" To her response, "I am helping to reopen the old camp around here." This elicits a response from some of the patrons. This also catches Alice's attention, and to her curiosity asks, "What's wrong?" The truck driver tells her about the history of the camp, how in 1974 a young boy drowned and his mother disappeared. Then 10 years later, 2 counselors were found brutally murdered in one of the cabins. After that, there's reports of a misshapen man roaming the forest, attacking young girls like yourself. Alice shrugs it off and says, "Well, I'm not afraid." As the story goes on, we meet all the other characters, some of which we follow as they explore the campgrounds. Here we begin seeing more and more POV shots as well of someone stalking each counselor, and soon after begins isolating and killing them one by one until all that remains is Alice. Alice would meet Pamela similar to how her counterpart did in the original. Pamela would pull up in her vehicle, introducing herself and trying to calm a distraught Alice down. Alice would tell her how everyone is dead, but Pamela would insist on checking it out for herself. Alice, of course, would say, "No, he'll kill you too," to Pamela's response, "I'm not afraid," with a slight smile out the corner of her mouth. As Pamela enters one of the cabins, she sees the carnage. Alice begins to become overwhelmed with fear as she realizes something isn't right. Pamela looks at Alice and says this place should have never been opened. There's been too much trouble here. She confesses to Alice about murdering the other 2 counselors in the beginning as revenge for her son's drowning. But this is barbaric. Pamela's reason for returning was to sabotage the camp to keep it closed, so that something like Jason's drowning would never happen again. But upon discovering Alice has found that someone has killed all the other counselors, Pamela pleads with Alice to come with her where they can drive back into town. But Alice doesn't trust her and accuses her of killing the others. Pamela would try to physically pull Alice to her car, resulting in a fight between the two, where Alice, in an attempt to save her own life, would use a machete to behead Pamela. Alice would then take Pamela's keys and get into her car, attempting to drive off, but is impaled from behind by a shadowy figure wearing a hockey mask. The next day, we see as the paramedics and police are on the scene cleaning things up. We follow a older paramedic as he is zipping up the body bag, which houses Pamela's body. We follow the paramedic from his time of cleaning up Crystal Lake until that night where he walks into his apartment and goes into almost a shrine to his son, who at this point we discover is Barry. He looks at a picture and says, "We made them pay, didn't we?" Suddenly, we hear a glass shatter from another room. There we see the name tag on the paramedic's jacket reading Roy. Roy goes to investigate as it turns out to be Barry's old room, filled with his old hockey gear and trophies, inscribed as Barry Joseph Burns, revealing Roy to have been the killer all along. Roy searches and realizes the same hockey mask he just used for his murders is missing. Roy notices one of the closets are slightly open and goes to investigate. As he pulls open the door, displayed on a shoebox is the head of Pamela. Roy is scared by this and backs up into a hulking figure, now wearing the hockey mask, who in turn is Jason Voorhees. He grabs Roy and shoves an ice pick into his temple, much like he did Alice in part 2, ending the film with Roy's body falling to the ground, the screen cutting to black, and the iconic I know it's a bit much having 3 killers and not actually showing Jason until the end, but I'm looking at it as just a standalone story and not a stepping stone to kickstarting a new franchise, but also leaving the door open just enough if filmmakers choose to. Also, I wanted to add elements from the first film of not knowing who the killer is and redoing certain events but having them play out differently. I am certain this would likely be as polarizing as the 2009 remake, but it's what I would do if given the chance to remake Friday the 13th. Do you like it? Comment below with your own thoughts and theories, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe, as well as hitting the notification bell to be alerted whenever a new video is uploaded. And as always, I am JG Darhk, and thanks for watching.